Congressman, thank you for being with us. Your intern's death was one of the more recent in a long list of tragic tales of young people who came to Washington to be part of the government, follow their dreams, and wound up as victims of violent crime. But Congress has the principal responsibility to oversee the federal district. Why didn't Congress act on this before? Why did it take so long? Why did it take a presidential intervention?
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to keep in mind is the District of Columbia. It was intentionally set up to be under federal responsibility. Now, over the years, we've created some laws that, they have a mayor, form of government, and council to have responsibility for that. But it's different than the states. One of the things that we run into is that a lot of responsibility and authority is delegated to the executive branch to do the roles that they have. And, as we've seen, as you highlighted just there, that, it's terrible, the crime rate that's been going on in Washington, D.C. And as a parent myself, I want a city that's safe for all of our children to come to, and certainly as our nation's capital, I want to make sure that we don't have a crime rate and a murder rate that's higher than Mexico City or Islamabad or any other capital around the world.
Well, it doesn't have as high a murder rate as some cities in the United States. The president's talking about sending troops to some of those places. He highlights Chicago and New York, but there are places in red states too, like Memphis, Tennessee, in Republican states where the crime rate is very high. How do you feel about the idea of deploying troops, nationalizing the National Guard in cities other than Washington, D.C., where you are 100% right? This is a federal district under federal control. How does it change when you go outside of Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, one of the things as we think about our republic is we intentionally designed it. It was intentionally designed by the founding fathers to have states, and they had responsibilities for their jurisdictions within that state. Obviously different, as we said earlier, than the District of Columbia. One of the things we do know is that we spend a lot of taxpayer dollars that are handed out to cities and states to make sure that they're utilized for law enforcement, for protecting Americans within the cities. And I would always be on the side of let's look at ways that we can make sure that we can protect Americans throughout the country.
Okay, the president is talking about a $2 billion fund for beautification in Washington, D.C. You guys have been cutting for D.C., not increasing the budget. How does $2 billion for D.C. beautiful sound to you?
I think there's a lot of things that we need to do. We want to have pride in our nation's capital. We want to make sure that it is outstanding when people come to visit. And obviously, there's a cost associated with that. But we also have a $2 trillion deficit every year that gets added to our debt. And we've got to be focused on a lot of those decisions, making sure that we're making the right use and the best use of federal taxpayer money that they come into us.
All right, before I turn you loose, I have to ask you, my colleague Mick Mulvaney blew his stack earlier in the show talking about the 10% stake that the government is going to take in the struggling microchip maker Intel as a condition of receiving the monies appropriated by Congress to boost the industry. Why should the government own part of a microchip company?
I think one of those things that you get into is if you're handing out federal taxpayer dollars, you want to make sure that you get a return for that there's a benefit for that. A lot of times it's the number of jobs, it's the amount of investment that's made in a community. This is an interesting way that President Trump's brought up in terms of looking at ownership. Now, I don't want the federal government owning and controlling businesses. That's the approach that China and some of the communist countries want. So we want to make sure that we still maintain our good free markets and free capital ownership in order to make sure that we continue to have the thriving economy that we have.